So, good evening, everyone. We are very happy to be here and that we can be part of this lecture series called afterFORM, as the first of 4 architecture collectives from Switzerland that have the opportunity to talk about their work here in the Barbican. So we're Lukas, Jakob, and me, Oliver, and together we form the collective 8000.agency, which, as Ellis said before, we founded in 2020 as part of graduation work, actually. But Jakob will tell you more in a few minutes about it, how it came to place and what our driving forces are. Yes. As this lecture series is trying to grasp the thoughts of younger practices in Switzerland, we would like to start with a little detour to quickly summarize what kind of impressions the Swiss architecture of the last decades has also made on us. So, the architecture that has emerged over the last 20 years in Switzerland is known for its high level of design, its high aesthetic clarity, and its precision in execution. In short, it's an architecture with a strive for formal clarity, be it on scales of city planning, of the building itself, or on the level of details. The last 2 decades have accelerated the production of architecture of that kind. Switzerland is growing, like the economy of Switzerland is growing, there are more people coming, the building sector is flourishing, and many projects have been under construction. So in recent years, this situation has caused a big boom of this Swiss architecture, with many interesting projects amongst it, and for many established offices, this also meant that it boosted their career. But what has also happened in the last decade is that Switzerland has decided to limit the zones for building. So today there is nearly no empty plots anymore, and the majority of the new construction that is happening happens within the existing built fabric. The term that describes this new trajectory is called inner densification, but as this densification has been paired with a culture that seeks for formal clarity, it also meant that in many cases the existing situation was simply ignored and treated as if there was nothing on site yet, as if there was literally a tabula rasa. So as you can see here on this cadastral map, where the planned overlaps the existing without making any connection. So in Zurich, this tendency has become especially obvious, as it led to the fact that sometimes even very young buildings from the 90s, as in this case, get replaced now after 30 years with buildings of sometimes even nearly identical capacity. But this also causes a push out of today's habitants. It often means doubling or even tripling of rental prices and a lot of material waste. There's also a term for it in German, which has developed out of it. It's called Ersatzneubau, and it means kind of a new build substitute of what was there before. So in this context of densification, where the strive for an aesthetic clarity has led to a building culture that wants to leave no question unanswered. In reality, this means to get rid of the maybe too complicated existing and replace it with an ideal one. In the words of Swiss sociologist Lucius Burckhardt, these projects try to be clean solutions. Solutions that want to answer all questions in one act. But as you can see here, the reality is often a different one. So we believe that in the fuzziness of today's world, a clean solution is nearly impossible, and it can maybe only hold for a very short time, because the world keeps turning, and soon the clean solution is no longer a solution at all, but wants to be solved again. And what we experienced in the last years is a kind of a collateral damage that this strive for perfection has caused.
So, where did we start? As students being embedded in this context of change, growth, and renewal within Zurich, we were confronted with a lot of questions we asked ourselves. Like, for example, which role we can take in the world, how can we make use of the means of an architect to find a position, and where could it lead us to? Having these questions in mind, we had the urge to frame our concerns and interests and wanted to get active. Our graduation project was the starting point of our collaboration, coming together under the title of 8000.agency. So what does this title actually tell us? Throughout our graduation project, we were intrigued by the term agency, especially because of its twofold meaning. On the one hand, the meaning of an organizational entity, and on the other, the ability to take an action and to have an impact. So the term agency framed our concern to get active, but also referred to us three as a collaborative entity. And the 8000, that was simply the postal code of Zurich, a hint towards the place of action and where it all started. As Oliver mentioned before, we are extremely excited and grateful to be invited to a series of talks, which were organized by the Architecture Foundation under the title of afterFORM. Being a relatively young practice, we discussed this title heavily and also the framing it offers, yet being unfamiliar with the fact that our work is conceptualized and understood in such a bigger context. But also to be clear, we appreciate the title and its framing, but we want to give our own reading to it. We actually approve that the Swiss architecture scene, especially in the last 20 years, put much emphasis on formal preoccupations. It seems to us that the term form might be reduced to its formal expressive dimensions only, as a shape. But for us, the term offers much more. Form, in its most abstract sense, is the particular way things appear to us, a mode of existence. So if we understand the term form in a much wider sense, we feel actually quite connected to it. A form of collaboration, a form of practice, a project as a form of dealing with an issue, a text as a form of answering a question, but also many more. So we would like to take you now on a journey through different forms of practice, different forms of working together, intervening, designing, reflecting, and different forms of agency we gained throughout the last years.
The first project we would like to talk about is our graduation project at ETH, which we did in the year 2020 at the chair of Tom Emerson and in collaboration with the chair of Ryffel. Back then in 2020, this collateral damage that I described before just started to become more obvious to us. And all this, what this transformation dynamics caused onto our surroundings. So we decided to investigate all these aspects in one building that is doomed to be demolished. It was this Wiedekerring estate in Zurich. It's a dense conglomerate of prefab housing units, which were opened in 1976, the same year as our current venue, the Barbican. And maybe in its aesthetics and attitude, it's not even too far away from it. But obviously, as it is of different size and also of different ambition, it had hosted 313 flats and was placed on the borders of Zurich. Anyways, when we came across this big estate doomed to be demolished, nobody was really aware of it, and there was also not much information available about it except some renderings from the new project. So we decided to use our own presence as a method to extract and gather knowledge and to get to know the place. And sometimes these acts were rather intuitive, sometimes a bit more calculated, but what's coming out of it is usually not yet known from the beginning. So as this year, 2020, was also the time when we closely observed the estate, was also the very last year of its existence before it got demolished. So many residents were on the leave, moving out of the city, as there's nearly no other place within the borders of Zurich where one could find a place which had comparable rents, basically. So their stuff accumulated in front of the entrances. And in order to interact and catch them before they have left, we decided to change our role into an amateur moving company and to help the residents move. So we put out this flyer and distributed it and found people that needed our help to leave their home. And through this, we found out many personal stories from them, and we found out where they go, what they will miss, and what they have maybe never even liked about this estate. And we also could even collect old floor plans that would have been trashed otherwise. An entire array of useful information if one wants to stitch together a bigger picture of densification, redevelopment, and displacement. On another occasion, we dug a hole into the plant basin on top of the underground parking to find out how much earth and biodiversity had accumulated before the disappearance of the estate, and to find out more about the executed construction. And yet, on another occasion, we also used the billboard, which we carried through the city first, did a little stop on the hill, and then moved it to its location at the estate. We weekly changed a poster with a new message from what we had found out during our research, talking with the passers-by, directing the attention onto the qualities of a nearly forgotten housing project from the 70s. And then at the end of the project, the impressions and explorations and the corresponding designs that were developed out of this research were condensed into a 70-minute movie where we walk through the estate and all our interventions and observations are narrated along. It can be found on our website if one would like to watch it on another occasion. But what's key to us is that kind of the power of being present and interacting and asking, talking, walking. It's immensely important if one wants to take the existing reality seriously.
So after our graduation in 2020, when things opened up again after the pandemic, we were asked by the local architecture museum ETH Villa Bellerive to exhibit our work, this time physically. We were really interested to translate our work, which we made digitally accessible, back into the physical realm, a back and forth between two worlds. During that time, the estate was already fenced off by these orange plates, protecting the neighborhood from upcoming heavy machinery and dirt and preparing the site for its demolition. For the show at the museum, we decided to work with the same orange boards, put together as a cabinet exhibition, a small room hosting a world within. It contained all the documents, building components, and objects we gathered, collected, and produced ourselves during our thesis year. Like a detective's room, one could follow the case Wiedeckering along different stories. And the content containing of research, documentation, performative acts, and design projects were presented non-hierarchically in a cloud of information and objects. With the demolition proceeding, day by day, the physical context of our work was deconstructed. While all demolition materials were piling up as a man-made mountain of debris outside of the city, the leftovers of our work, material and immaterial evidence, was still accessible for the public in the museum, protected by the same orange walls.
The next project that we want to talk about is a competition entry for a park in Basel, close to the border to France. And it's an area that at the moment is going through massive transformation from a railway yard and storage area to residential and working quarter. And similar to the last image you saw, what we came up in there when we first were there are these massive piles of material that was coming from deconstruction of the surrounding buildings, as well as excavation material from the transformation going on. And somehow we found also there, we were fascinated by these piles, and we found that somehow they created a temporary landscape that connected very well to the stony ecosystem that has developed during many years along the train tracks. What formed here was a third landscape, as described by Gilles Clément in his book Manifesto of the Third Landscape. A territory for many different species that have nowhere else to go. It can develop on abandoned sites, and it's characterized by high but rather unstable species diversity. Pioneer species follow in very short circles, and it's a place that is open for all species, be they native or not. It's a refuge and at the same time a stage for new possibilities. So we try to embrace this concept for our proposal of the park in Saint-Louis. And the aim was to reduce somehow the amount of waste material, the movement of the amount of waste material that is generated in this process of transformation. So what we propose is to reuse as much excavated material and deconstruction waste as possible to construct the new park. The material was arranged along the train tracks in a series of hills of different heights and shapes. And like this, we extended the dry, warm habitat along the train tracks and diversified it by the shapes of the hills. We proposed that these hills will be spontaneously overgrown, and the different exposures and steepness will lead to a very multifaceted and biodiverse vegetation. As a counterpart to the dry, warm, hilly landscape, a linear forest was created in the interface between the buildings and this hill landscape. The trees grow in slight hollows that serve as retention areas for roof and surface water. This creates kind of a hardwood meadow made possible by the special conditions of the new city that is being constructed there at the moment. Bigger chunks of demolition material on the hills leave space for various species like snakes or other animals. Here on the lower side you can see the plants and the animals that we would expect in these different areas of this landscape that we create. And then the more water-loving animals and plants would be on the other side. And the humans have also their place in between, that there are these walkways and viewing platforms on top of the hill. And it allows both for animals, plants, and humans most possible freedom to use this space. Here you can see an overview again of these walkways and how they go up onto the hills. So overall, we try to use the specificities of the site to create a park that can connect the city with the ecosystem of the train tracks that is already there, and leaves at the same time enough freedom for everyone, flora, fauna, and humans to develop within this park. So also for the next one. The next one is a competition for housing estate in Zurich that is also again was also programmed as a replacement. And here what we got when we entered the competition was like a completely empty model. So somehow this excavation from the last time there was already done within the model, and there was no trace at all of the existing building. So for us, it was a bit of the question, how can we even act when it's so clear what the organizers of the competition expect from us by just replacing it with something completely new, not even taking into account the topography that is also missing. So somehow we had a lot of questions what this means, and we wanted to find out what the reality behind this is and what actually is there instead of this big hole. And we started to research ourselves a lot about this place. And at the same time, we also wanted to know someone from the city if they are sure what they're doing, and if they could also give us more information about the estate to somehow make open the possibility that you actually work with what you have. So what we decided to do is to ask a lot of questions in the obligatory question and answer round that is always there in Swiss competitions. So there you can ask whatever question you have, and they have to answer it and send the answers to all the competitors in the competition. So we sent around 40 questions and really flooded the question round and tried to get as much as information out of the city of Zurich to, for one, know why they decided to destroy it, and on the other hand, to get the plans and the information out to everyone, so everyone could somehow reconsider to work with the building, because this information was distributed to everyone. And so we got a huge list of all the plants and animals that live there. We got these plans that were before not available that show the exact location of the buildings. And but for us, then it was still not clear what should we do actually, what project should we hand in. So we decided to continue the way we started, to just make available as much information as possible. And we meticulously built in the existing structure into the model with the correct topography and with all the buildings and even all these trees around the neighborhood. And for the hand-in, we decided at this point we just want to hand in the existing situation, actually, with all the plans and with all the study that we did around this place. So then we handed in at the end 8 A0s, quite a big hand-in that was just documenting all this place in all its different forms. We were visiting a lot of inhabitants, talking with them. Also, you can find all these animals that live there distributed over the plans. And the question and answer part was also integrated into this. So it was almost like an interview with the city that at the end the city got back at the end. So here's some zoom-ins of this, where we were writing about also the ecological parts and somehow framing this whole place where it actually is and what it actually is. But somehow the question that we asked at the end was this, that the contemporary architectural discourse calls for contributions that deal with the complexity of what already exists. With this collection, we tend to support projects that pursue a different strategy than the one prescribed by the competition. Unfortunately, this take from us couldn't change the course of the process. The jury concluded, in the spirit of a productive uncertainty, the dilemma of dealing with architectural heritage from the 1960s was discussed in detail. While honoring the valuable, thought-provoking ideas, the entry has to be rejected in a qualified manner. So much to Salzweg.
But we actually also enjoy working on projects and taking part in competitions maybe in a more productive way if the framework is set right. Last summer, we were selected for a competition on the transformation of a railway building outside of Zurich, a task where it was explicitly asked to work with the existing and transform it. It was put out as a relatively open brief that asked for a concept on how to work with the existing building and how it could be activated with new programs, densification and renovation. The location, well, this is hard to see, huh? But on top you see like the main station of Zurich, and actually this kind of void is the lake, and there you see a commuter's line. And this was quite a strategic moment for this project, as Adliswil is a commuter's place outside of Zurich, and it's extremely well connected to the city through this train station. And these kind of places actually also face the same kind of pressure as the city of Zurich, as this growth also is flowing along the transportation connections. The building itself is from the 1980s and has fallen out of date. Difficult to rent out apparently, and its appearance has become hard to enjoy due to renovations in the last 40 years. But in essence, a solidly built project with quite some utilization potential on the plot. For us, it was the question on how can we approach this building with a minimal intervention on the existing matter, but still providing a new program to the place. Just because of its strategic location, we proposed to shift the whole building towards housing and keeping the public base with the supermarket and the small shops. So we could actually split up the building vertically into 3 parts, which is on the bottom part, this public infrastructure, which belongs to the train station. In the middle part, housing, which we introduced into the existing building, and on top, shared roof terrace. And to make use of the entire existing floor spaces, and also because of the lack of code-compliant circulation spaces, we propose to extend the building not only vertically with 2 stories, but also horizontally. And by that, a light structure with galleries was added in front of the existing building, providing outdoor spaces to the newly created flats while solving the circulation, and also giving the existing building a new expression. The way we imagine that people can live together in this place is mainly for small households. So in the bottom part, the building, the existing building was transformed into quite spacious 2-room flats apartments with this collective roof terrace. And on the top part, we actually introduced a cluster flat, like a more collective way of living together for individuals. Funny enough, we did manage to make the most efficient project in terms of usable area and expected building cost through these minimal interventions. And they also liked the way of collective living we proposed. But the architecture jury mainly had aesthetic concerns with the project. They titled under the term bricolage, or they actually questioned the bricolage we introduced at this place, and they saw this quite critically. Maybe also this was a generational conflict.
Thoughts about exterior circulations and adding things now leads us to another project that we're on. We were granted like a Forschungsstipendium. This is a research scholarship from the Federation of Swiss Architects last fall, where we explore topics of openness and porosity and exterior circulations in architecture. And this comes kind of from a fascination that we've had since quite some time. And we feel that this is kind of a collective fascination for also younger generation in Switzerland about these really exciting projects that were built in, many that were built in the late 80s, 90s in Switzerland, and which have somehow been a little bit forgotten or flowing around the mainstream understanding. And so, for example, also projects like this one, where there's like light, bright bridge constructions and external staircases that fold like three-dimensional neighborhoods, which also 30 years later are still very present and adventurously lived spaces in our view. So this research started with kind of an intuitive fascination for these spaces, and we started collecting the histories, qualities, and opportunities and risks about these typologies. Also now that we're in London, we try to visit many as there are many examples distributed around London where these type of topics were part of the design. And also projects like this one maybe which have maybe the problem that they're sometimes been stigmatized or idealized, and it can flip very quickly. So here in this case, which you're maybe familiar with, porosity and permeability was rather a threat. And this was the Broadwater Farm Estate in North London, which hosted some riots in the mid-80s. And this kind of influenced also the image on these elevated walkways that were, after these riots, destroyed and demolished. And this image also maybe stayed a bit to this typology of architecture. As one can see, I think this was some years ago there, and apparently this is how it should look like very soon. And also found that it's right now under demolition. Yeah, but anyways, we've realized that this tipping into good or bad is a property which is kind of dualistic. So what we explore with these exterior circulations and these kind of open access structures is rather the nuances between, it's not only one or the other, but it's an exterior circulation, and at the same time it can also be a lived space, or that it can host also other spatial and ecological values that overlap the function of circulation. So that these kind of exterior structure leave pure monofunctionality, and various values can be attributed to it. So like, for example, in this case, it's a very nice example from Zurich, the Helmutstrasse project, where the access area connects kind of 3 units and has space for plants and social interactions. But our aim with the research is actually now to let this fascination for these exterior circulations collide with the contemporary questions for how to deal with what we already have. And we believe that these typologies have a potential in dealing with the existing buildings, especially when densification is desired and when the required standards are difficult to achieve in the existing. Here, for example, a project from the late 80s where Luigi Snozzi connected an existing old house with 3 new units by an exterior circulation, and at the same time freeing the existing house from its circulation function and connecting all the 4 units around it. So in this research scholarship, we'll follow these traits and try to implement them into with the trajectory of reusing existing structures.
The next project is an entry into Lausanne Jardins that we actually can realize next year, 2024. Lausanne Jardins is a garden festival where small interventions are distributed around the city of Lausanne. And there, the place that we looked at was these fields of this area with a lot of football fields, like a very mono-used space. And as mentioned before, we're not so interested in this clear definition of things. And we were thinking, yeah, it's very strange that there are all these football fields that can be only used as this, and it's very clear how the rules work and what you do on them. And through this, we started to look a bit closer at the football fields themselves, and started to look at what actually are they made of. And so we found out that they're mostly made of a mix of different species of grass, like Lolium perenne, Festuca rubra, or Poa pratensis are 3 different grasses that look very differently, but we never actually see them on these football fields because they're always cut, and we don't see how they flower and how tall they actually can be. But sometimes if we look a bit next to the football field, we realize that they can get quite high, sometimes like 70 or even high, 70 centimeters or even higher, as high as me. And somehow we got fascinated by what these football fields are actually made of. I looked at this picture of Albrecht Dürer that is called the Great Lawn. And somehow from this we thought, wow, it looks very nice, these huge grasses. And we started to imagine that we were like very small football players within these huge grasses that Albrecht Dürer was painting. And that's why we started to research a bit about what grass actually is. And the family of grasses includes cereal grasses, bamboos, and grasses of natural grassland, and all the species of cultivated lawns. And we realized that it's probably the plant family that is most closely connected to humans. It's used as food for us, like wheat, rice, but also for animals, and as well as a resource for building materials and biofuels. So it's a super important plant that we normally don't really think about, that at the end also makes up these football fields. So what we proposed was then to make a playing field for grasses and humans alike, a field that is marked with white chalk, but within this field the grasses can grow to their full extent, and we also propose to have various types of grasses there, and they stand there, sometimes small, sometimes taller than any human. And to play on these fields we cannot use the strictly defined rules of football originating in the 19th century. The lawn is not merely the terrain to play anymore, but the grass itself becomes part of the game. We cannot ignore its intensity, its growth, and its strength. We propose to play together with the grasses, this species that is so closely related to all of our human history. The installation reflects of this history of lawns in gardens and sports, but focusing on the species that compose them. The selection of grasses planted on the field highlights the incredible variety and importance these plants have for humankind. Humans and grasses developed together over thousands of years. During the time of Lausanne Chardons next year, we will have the opportunity to play together and find new rules of the game.
So, next to our own practice, we are still engaged at ETH in teaching at the chair of Jan De Vylder, as Alice already mentioned. And with that, we still try to bridge our own interest between the school environment and what is going on in the city. At the chair, we developed an exercise which deals with this topic of transformation in Zurich and tries to give a methodology to it, how we could work on it differently. The 33%, as it is called, is a strategy which originated from the practice of Jan De Vylder, but got adapted to the Zurich realm. The idea behind this number is to question the idea of a 100% strategy, always trying to solve everything at once. We ask ourselves, why should projects try to aim for this completeness? And how can we think of openness also in a design project? So the percentage sign, as such, always refers to something bigger, but yet tries to do more with less. How can a fragment of a project change a situation and by that have 100% impact? So looking for small interventions with a big impact. The task in Zurich with that many replacement projects, as Oliver explained before, is closely related to the question of how can we work with these existing realities when they collide or overlap with the new realities which are planned. And why should old and new contradict or totally replace, or rather collide in a more productive way? The sites for the projects we research every semester in the beginning together, And these are projects of replacement. So the work of the studio was to integrate the existing reality, which is shown in red, partly into the planned project, and by that improving both. To give an impression on some of the outcomes so far, looking at a few examples. For example, with this one, where insurance company had several stories of underground parking, and the new housing project was planned, actually could have benefited quite well from this existing basement, and the students proposed to open it up and let it be part of the landscape. So why changing it all, or rather why not integrating it and improving both? Or this one, which questions more the logics of investment and tries to adapt to it in a more fragmented way, investing into small fragments and not trying to be per se against this investment, but it's more a question of where to place it. And also the question of how this change can actually take place, how it happens, and in which time frames, and what do these time frames then mean. In the studio, we can learn as much from the students and their ways of dealing with it as they can learn from our recent experience with these transformation processes. It's a matter of thinking collectively and develop ways of dealing with the world around us. Here, this was from the semester 1 year ago in the atelier we had an old car factory. And then a last project, which is, or not the last project, there are more coming, I guess, but one more, yeah. But this one is a very recent one, which is also ongoing, and which is working on a different scale. It's a densification strategy for the commune of Davos. Davos as an alpine city with a very specific history of urban redevelopment. It went from 2 little villages with the sanatoriums around the late 19th century to ski resorts, to an event place, as you know, with the World Economic Forum, and is today quite a complex urban place, high up in the Alps. And since 2014, all communes in Switzerland are forced to limit their construction to the existing building land, and by that make better use of it. So for that, these communes have to propose a strategy how to make this work and how to densify within the existing city. And these conditions and legal frameworks, which caused so much demolition in Zurich in the last years, are now on discussion actually in Davos. And we are quite excited about being part of this discussion now and working with the commune together on how this densification can happen within the existing city. So having our experience, our very recent experience in mind, and also with the learnings from the studio at ETH, we want to develop the strategies with the existing through the means of rules and regulations and buildings codes.
And now to a last little excursion into a project that we do together with a bigger group. So like the 3 of us are part of a bigger collaboration, which is called ZAS, and it's an association that we founded 2 years ago together with around 15, 20 other architect friends in Zurich. And in order to kind of push against the wasteful attitudes through very punctual counter-narratives and certain types of subversive forms of resistance and engagement. And in this way, we try to also transcend the scale of our own practices as professionals, as architecture offices, and try to create a momentum through a condensed but precise collective engagement. So one of the things that we did together with this group was when we all participated in many of these competitions that were like taking where the question was to replace an existing structure completely. And it was kind of a bit frustrating for us to always be a bit too late in these processes. So that then we understood that if we want to change this practice, we have to intervene a bit earlier in the process and to create a fertile ground for a productive discussion on how to dwell on the existing. So with thus, we organized an unsolicited competition for this outdated public housing estate from the 70s. So it's like 3 of these concrete towers that were meant to be demolished this spring. And it's like, given the general housing shortage in Zurich, it felt very odd to us, like 2 years ago, that these 750 empty rooms were to be demolished, even without a replacement, but only to create space for a possible future use of the plot. So the plans to demolish these 3 towers that you see here on the left go back to the late 90s, when people were not yet thinking much about ecologically building, or when housing was less of a scarce commodity. But still, it was a mystery to us that no one had these plans on their radar. So the course of events that happened then, briefly summarized. We wrote an article to bring the demolition to the attention of a broader public. And suddenly a discussion about the 3 towers started. And other newspapers wrote about it, and it was discussed in the local council, in the Zurich council. And finally, after some political advances from members of the parliament, an extension of the current interim use by 10 years is now under discussion. But then, with the arrival of Ukrainian refugees in Switzerland, one of these towers got activated as a buffer for people to live. And it became even more obvious to us how useful these towers are, especially in times of crisis. So these 750 cheap rooms offer an enormous potential for a city with a severe housing shortage. And we decided to write our own brief for these 3 towers. And then we organized a speculative competition about them, and to trigger a collective intelligence of an engaged community of architects. We were sure that as citizens of Zurich, and therefore to a certain extent also the owners of the towers, we are allowed to think about the city's property in a speculative way. So we proposed to accept the 3 towers as a city hotel, like a Stadthotel, a place that can accommodate people for a short or for a longer period, and keeps on working as a buffer. The Stadthotel was our idea, but we also encouraged the participants to think beyond it and to come up with other proposals. So for the competition program, we prepared all the necessary documents to work with the towers, and we recalculated the shadow studies, which were one of the hindering the use of the towers as a housing tower, because the rules had changed in the meantime. And we also prepared plans and did fire safety analysis, etc. Then 45 submissions from all over Switzerland and Germany, and some cases also beyond, were handed in and were publicly juried in order to make a debate about the future of these towers also accessible to a wider public. And in addition, all the submitted works were shown in an exhibition and online, and we actively invited representatives of the authorities and other politicians to discuss the topic with us. Many newspapers also took up the discourse and put some news about these proposals. So with this competition and other actions that we do together with the bigger collaboration of ZAS, we explore how we can engage collectively, and we try to renegotiate the position of the architectural profession within a public discourse, and also to maintain its political agency.
So, coming closely to the end, the work we presented to you today is all work in progress. It's a process of us trying to find a way to interact with the world, with a system that we are thrown in. And it's always like action, reaction in every single project. but also seen all together. And things influence each other sometimes, and sometimes not at all, sometimes build up on each other, sometimes not. Nevertheless, we figured out that there are some principles and ideas that help us to act within our ambivalent and unpredictable world, where we are always confronted with plentiness of information, realities, and ideologies. We tried to look at the world without prejudice. Wait. Hopla. Yeah, sorry. We try to look at the world without prejudice, taking small and seemingly unimportant things seriously as well. Like actually watching the grass grow, or having tea with inhabitants, or wanting to know how much earth there actually is before the concrete of the parking garage starts. Sometimes these observations work like clues for us. They can give us starting points for a process which we try to follow without knowing in the beginning where they lead or what form of project will come out of it. We like to connect things, to see many elements at once and to find the relationship between what we observe. Sometimes we follow different clues with different starting points and manage to collide them. We are not looking for clean solutions and a dualistic world. We are not interested in 100%. Something completely finished clearly cannot exist. All things can evolve. You do something, but you're not the only one who is doing something. And someone else will come in future to change things again. The 33% or whatever percent is only a start. Overall, what drives us is rather an attitude than a focus on an object or a scale or a type of work. We're interested to navigate into yet unpredictable realms. For this, sometimes short moments of an outside view onto our field of competence are needed. Arriving back home in the role of architects, we might use our knowledge and tools differently and act more consciously, also taking unnoticed things into account. Therefore, form, be it in a way we work, the way we communicate, or the way things look like, is rather the result of a process than being clearly defined. Sometimes the film is the right way to act, sometimes the organization of a competition, but sometimes it's also the basic means of architects, plan and section. To follow clues means to not know yet where a project leads, or even when exactly it starts. To follow clues means to develop projects we could not have thought of without the active involvement of the world around us. Thank you.